Hello everyone, this is the great Lord and Master Osiron, the Eternal, for what is going to be part 6 in the Osiron Tarot Spiral. This video has been a long time coming. I'm going to focus on the tarot pips today, and I'm going to show you that the tarot pips are by far the most messed up aspect of the tarot that there is. I mean, there is just really no way to fix the tarot pips without completely reconstructing the pips. So in regards to the tarot pips, like for any tarot deck that has pictures with them, like the Weight deck and Golden Dawn decks and stuff like that, or other decks that have pictures with them, you're better off treating the pips as like oracle cards, because the meanings that are associated with them are derived from two main sources. One of them is the Kabbalistic tree of death and stagnation, and the other one is the zodiac and the planetary placements on the wheel of the zodiac. But now, when you analyze that, what you see is, first you have to say, why is the planetary, why are the planetary assignments assigned to any given card? A perfect example is, like the first card that we would see here would be the Two of Wands. It would begin that, and Mars rules that, because it begins with Mars. Here's the planetary orders, because you really have to ask yourself, why are the planets in the order they're in, and what does that really mean at the end of the day? And here's the traditional order for the planets. They go like this. It starts out with Mars, the Sun, Venus, Mercury, the Moon, Saturn, and Jupiter. And all that does is it begins in Aries, and it loops around the entire zodiac, repeating until it runs out, and it ends where it started, with the same one that started it, with Mars finishing up the circuit. In the last card that would be here in the traditional tarot keys would be the Ten of Cups, and that would be Mars in there. So the tarot pips derive their meanings from the false tree and this planetary layout. But now that layout, I'm postulating that is a false layout. Now, I've read in other Kabbalistic books that the real New Year, or in the ancient times, the real New Year would have fell on 0 degrees of Leo. And if you use that planetary sequence, it starts out like this. So if you're starting at 0 degrees Leo, it begins with Saturn, Jupiter, Mars, the Sun, Venus, Mercury, and the Moon. And if you do that, it would, of course, begin and end with Saturn. If you shift it to Aries, where it belongs, you're going to move all that around and shift it to Aries, it would begin and end with Saturn. But there's some flaws with this as to that, and I'll get to that. But now, if in pondering this, you have to ask yourself, why are the planets in the order they are, and what does it mean? And it basically doesn't mean much of anything the way it is. But now, if you use the planetary order that is found on the zodiac itself, and then use that is a much better formula for the planetary orders. And that is simply the way the planets appear on the axis of the Great Lord. If you remember from the earlier videos in this series, there's an axis line that all the planets are mirrored on the zodiac, and that runs from between Cancer and Leo, and then it splits the two houses of Saturn on the bottom. And that planetary order is almost the same as 0 degrees Leo, but there are some differences. So the 3-6 axis, of course, begins with Saturn, Jupiter, Mars, Venus, Mercury, the Moon, and ends with the Sun. Now there is one other aspect to that planetary order that sort of gives it a valid nature. It sort of reveals something within it. Now if you're looking at this planetary order, and if you remember from the Staff of Hermes in the earlier videos how every planet has a positive and negative aspect, and then when you combine that with the tarot court cards, there's only a couple planets that have an absolute masculine presentation, and that is Jupiter and Mercury. The rest of them, and there's a lot of other planets that have the cherubics. So when you're looking at the zodiac, the cherubics are very important, as I've pointed out in earlier videos. But if you analyze in this order sequence, the 3-6 axis order sequence, it begins with Saturn, which has a cherubic aspect. It ends with the Sun, which also has a cherubic aspect. In dead center is with Venus, which also has a cherubic aspect. So when you take away those 3 planets, you're left with 4 planets. You got Jupiter, Mars, Mercury, and the Moon. Now only one of those 4 planets has a cherubic aspect, and that is Mars. Mars is the final planet that has a cherubic aspect. So now what you're left with is, in this of these 2 planets, one of them is not cherubic, and that's Jupiter. And now these 2, both of these are not cherubic, and that gives you a 2. So it sort of reveals a 1 and a 2 in this planetary sequence. You know. And it just so happens that the cards that don't have the cherubic influence, the Jupiter has a completely masculine presentation, Mercury has a completely masculine presentation, and the Moon has a completely feminine presentation. Okay, the rest of them have a cherubic aspect somewhere along the line. And now, if you do that and you lay out the ring of planets until it ends, it's going to begin with Saturn, and it's going to loop all the way around again and end with Saturn. Well, if you recall, the zodiac begins and ends with Saturn when you use the axis of the Great Lord and use it in its precession cycle as seen in the Spear of Destiny. It begins with Capricorn, which is Saturn, and it goes around in a precession, and it ends in Aquarius again with Saturn. So this is congruent with the very theme of Saturn being the goddess of life. Now, when it comes to that, I just want to add a quick thing about that. Saturn, why is Saturn worshipped as a god? Now, there's an excellent video series, and this sort of goes into a whole new line of thought, but why is Saturn revered as a god or a goddess? Well, there's actually a theory out there, it's called the Purple Dawn theory, and that theory postulates that Saturn was at one time a brown dwarf star, and the planets that were associated with it in the beginning were Mars, and then Earth was a part of that planetary aspect. And there's videos on this. This goes hand in hand. This meshes with the electric universe theory too. And there's a lot of presentations on this, and it's actually very, very plausible. And what happened was, at one point in time, our sun that we have today captured Saturn in its orbits, and Mars and Earth in its orbits, and then Venus was there later, and then that's why we have the solar system we have today. But at one time in our recorded past, that Saturn was actually our star. And the reason I say in our recorded past is because the ancients knew this. That's why the ancients revere Saturn as a god and all the things like this. Because if you look at, there's a video series called something like I forget exactly what it is, but it goes hand in hand with the electric universe theory. It's something alien sky, and it gets into the idea that Saturn was a brown dwarf star, and that Mars and Venus, later Venus appeared in the scene, and it shows why some of the symbols are used the way they are and stuff like that. It's really fascinating, very fascinating. But getting back to the Purple Dawn theory, there's a lot of powerful reasons on our planet that kind of fit that model very well. And one of them is the creatures that are native to this planet. most of them have great eyesight at night. And the plants of this planet respond very well to red light. They don't really need the full spectrum of the sun's light, most of them. They can get fine with just the red light, and that's what it would have been, because the reason they call it the purple dawn theory is because the brown dwarf star with Mars and Earth in it was surrounded by a plasma sheath that's shaped like an egg. So that's where the cosmic egg theories come from, because at one time we were in the envelope of the plasma field of Saturn, and we didn't have days and nights like we have today, because it was all a constant glowing light. There was no days and nights. It was always the same. The temperature was the same. It was just a sort of like a perpetual twilight. And it is really, really fascinating how they come to these conclusions, and how the evidence actually supports it very well. It's very fascinating. And that is why Saturn is revered as the mother goddess that she is, because at one time she was our star, a brown dwarf star. So, now there is an alternative method that I made up myself, how you could use the tarot, because basically what all this means is the planetary assignments to the tarot are basically arbitrary. The reason why some cards have a bad connotation is because usually the planetary aspect that goes along with it is negative. And a perfect example is 0 degrees Leo. The card that goes there is the Five of Wands. And the reason it's negative is because the occultists like to associate Saturn in a context, a bad context. So 0 degrees Leo is the Five of Wands. But there's no way to really remember all the planetary placements without just, getting into your mind what the cards are. You just sort of remember what they are. There is no real formula to really remember what planetary placement goes where, other than just to recall through experience what they are. But I made up another way, because if you're assuming that planetary placements are arbitrary, well, you might as well develop, in that case, a structure that isn't arbitrary. And this is sort of an alternate method that you could use with the tarot if you're out in the field doing readings and you want to just pull information from the top of your head, and you're using cards that don't have pictorial significance. Because nowadays, if you're using like a weight deck, the pictures tell a story, so you might as well just use them as oracle cards, and whatever the picture is saying, just use that. Perfect example is like the Four of Cups. There's significance within that picture that suggests things, or the Ten of Swords, or any of those cards. Just use them as oracle cards, basically, because the meanings that are derived from them are from two faulty structures: a bad planetary order in the zodiac, and then the Tree of Death and Stagnation on the Kabbalistic Tree of Death and Stagnation. So there's no way to fix the pips, is what I'm getting at. So another way to do it is just to use the numbers in how they relate to the planets of the week. So in this case, it would be, the order would be the days of the week. It would be Moon, Mars, Mercury, Jupiter, Venus, Saturn, the Sun. And then to finish it up with 8 and 9, I will just use the 8 as Earth, and then 9 would be like the cosmos. 9 would be everything. So I put the alpha and the omega signal there. And when you do it that way, the numbers would always be fixed. So every time you draw a 5, it would always be Venus. Every time you draw a 4, it would always be Jupiter. Anytime you draw a 1, it would always be the Moon, and so on and so forth. 8 would always be Earth, 9 would always be the cosmos, Saturn would always be 6, and so on and so forth. And that's how it would go. So that way, if you're doing readings out in the world, you don't have to try to think of what planetary placement goes where. It'll be fixed every time. So that's sort of an alternate method you could use. And the reason I put that in there is, like I said before, is because the planetary assignments are arbitrary. They don't mean anything. The only reason they're there is because of they just randomly fall in that position when you circle the zodiac with the planetary orders you use. But by far, of what I've figured out so far, the best planetary system to use, and the one that makes the most sense, is the 3-6 axis, which is derived from the zodiac itself. So if you use that, it's going to be congruent with itself. So that's how that goes. And now, another thing that I want to get to is the tarot keys, the tarot pips are numbered 1 through 10. Okay, that's how they are. And as we know from the previous works, that is a false order. And what happens when you do that, that shows you why the tarot court cards are presented in an offset manner. Because in the official tarot, or Golden Dawn or Kabbalistic tarot, the deacons, the court cards are offset by a deacon. And there's no legitimate reason for that at all, because I've looked at that and there isn't one. So, but the reason why it's doing that is they could have been telling you, they could have been showing you that the number sequence is out of phase, because how it goes in the tarot, in the traditional tarot, is the aces count as 1, and the aces are assigned to each quadrant. But then it begins with 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and then ends in 10. Well, if you look at excuse me. If you look at the greater number sequence, that 10 will ultimately reduce to a 1, and then it shifts the whole thing back by a deacon, just like the court cards are presented, offset by a deacon. So then it would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and this 10 would turn into a 1. So everything's offset. But when you fix it and use the proper code and put 1 where it belongs here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, it begins with a 1 and ends with a 9 the way it should be. And what happens when you do that, as we've seen in other works, is it presents what I'm now calling the Osiron square. Is it presents the numbers, the cherubics will be 1, 4, 7. I'm sorry, the cardinals will be 1, 4, 7. The cherubics are 2, 5, 8. And the other ones are 3, 6, and 9. And this also presents the vortex math number groups, 1, 4, 7, 2, 5, 8, 3, 6, 9. And it also presents the square, if you recall from the vortex math video, the vortex math and the 2D cube. And there's a section on that where I get into the Saturn, the cube of Saturn. And then I show how the numbers produce their own cube. Well, this is revealing that here as well. And it shows the number sequence in its normal pattern, with the feminine taking the corners in the center and the masculine taking the supporting center roles. But if you do it with the other way, beginning with the 2 and ending with 10, it locks it up just like the Saturn square does, where it puts the masculine in the corners and in the center, but it takes the 1, because the 1 reduces to a 1, and that's obviously feminine. But remember, the expression of the 10 is a masculine expression of the 1-0 combination in this case, because it's an even number. So before 10 is broken down, it has a masculine face, and that's what's being presented here with the 10 in the corner. So it's sort of producing a false number grid that is harmonized with the toxic cube of Saturn as well. So there's a lot of negativity in this misaligned construct. So it's very important to fix the pips and put the order the way it belongs. So the tarot pips, truthfully, should follow the order of the single digit code, 0 through 9, and the ace should be regarded as 0, and the rest of the numbers, 1 through 9, should be used for the lower pips. That's how it should be. But again, the tarot decks out there are designed, and they're built upon the false construct. See, the tarot trumps you can fix, the court cards, they can be fixed, but the tarot pips are so fucked up that there's no way to fix them without completely redoing the system. Because it's the core of it, at its root, the foundation is bogus from every concept, from every construct that you try to rationalize why the number sequences for the pips are the way they are. So short of completely reworking the tarot pips is what you would really have to do to fix it. You might as well just use your existing tarot decks as oracle decks. Don't worry about the occult significance as it's presented because it's false. So because you're using shit, so the pips are designed using a shit system right now, and there's no way to fucking fix it without complete reconstruction. Basically, is what all this means. So this is called the Tarot Pip Smackdown. It's showing the various planetary orders and why they are the way they are. It's also highlighting an alternate method, the Osiron Tarot Spiral method, which would just use 1 through 9, and most of those are denoted to the planets of the week, and then the extras would be the Earth 8, and then the Alpha Omega or the Cosmos card, which would be 9. And when you do it this way, it's beautiful because the Ace is 0, and the 9 is sort of like the fucking 0 unmasked, as I say before, because 9 is 0 unmasked. So this is that. So this is the tarot pips broken down in a way that tries to make sense of something that is just so messed up at its core that it's virtually unsalvageable the way it is now. So because if you try to use the new meanings, the proper planetary order, or even the Osiron order, but if you use the 3-6 axis order, that's going to completely throw off the meanings of every card. Because this is beginning with Mars, and that's sort of like a very hostile, and that's a hostile way to begin the sequence, because Mars is the god of war. So you're basically setting the stage for warfare, you know what I mean? But if you do it right and put Saturn here where it belongs, Saturn is just the mother goddess of everything that is, basically. And it begins with Saturn, it goes around, and it ends with Saturn. And that's a much more proper way to do it. It's congruent with the zodiac itself. Everything's congruent when you do it this way, using the axis, the 3-6 axis as your planetary orders. And it even reveals a 1 and a 2 in the sequence that gives you the 12 of the zodiac. So I think I'm fairly confident that my methods for the pips, as along with the whole Osiron Tarot Spiral, are going to be the model for what the tarot is, because the Osiron Tarot Spiral tarot system is the most perfect tarot system in existence by and far. There isn't a tarot system out there that can touch the Osiron Tarot Spiral tarot system, because it's a complete system from beginning to end, and I've never seen anything that even comes close to it. So, thank you, and namaste.